As Gabrielle carried on with her presentation, Jindo held one of the design sheets, trying to make a head or tail of it. It was a fur coat, its right sleeve adorned with a host of origami pleats, while the left side sported 2 detachable patches of different furs. It was glaringly apparent that this was beyond his grasp. Sensing his struggle, Gabrielle teased him, a smirk playing on her lips.
"You know this? No, it's easy."
A prickling annoyance crept up on Jindo at her jibe, but he resisted conceding his inability. Instead, his little ego led him to pretend some semblance of understanding.
Well, I haven't done anything like this before, but theoretically, I think I have an idea how to start.
Clutching at straws to keep up his pretense, Jindo desperately rifled through his memory for any garment he'd seen before bearing even a passing resemblance. He remembered a dress from last year's Paris wedding fair, a sea of origami pleats that gave it its unique shape. The designer had confessed that the dress was the fruit of 3D printing technology, something she'd wrestled with for months. This memory deflated Jindo's initial optimism. Gabrielle might have insinuated that the coat could be fashioned by hand, but he knew the reality wouldn't be as straightforward as she implied. Indeed, he found himself utterly at a loss for a starting point, even contemplating whether this coat might eventually be omitted from the collection. However, he remained circumspect for the moment, keeping his concerns under wraps while endeavouring to glean as much information as possible. He then broached the subject of the overall expectations, including the total number of pieces and the timeline. Gabrielle declared that there would be a minimum of 60 pieces, all due by mid-January, in preparation for Paris Fashion Week.
Okay, Gabrielle, by the way, is it the quantity you normally make per collection?
He asked, having noted that her previous collections seemed less extensive.
"Yes, of course. Why, you think Chanel makes just 10 pieces for their runway?"
As was the norm, Jindo found himself at a loss for words at the mention of the prestigious brand name. With no experience working for such big names or taking part in a runway show, he couldn't offer a retort. Instead, he attempted a change of topic.
No, Gabrielle. I'm just trying to work out how I can manage the workload. By the way, are we doing a runway show for this collection?
Well, that will depend on how good it is."
She seemed a touch sheepish at first, giving a rather nebulous answer. Meanwhile, Jindo found this puzzling, knowing full well that a runway show would typically involve a cast of thousands and demand a hefty amount of work. Nevertheless, given the designer's blithe dismissal of the subject, he held his doubts in check and decided not to press her further. He surmised that the director must have her own agenda and chose to move on.
Okay, Gabrielle. I'll do my best. By the way, we're going to use the existing constructional patterns, right?
No, I want you to make all the patterns.
Pardon?
Taken aback, Jindo gaped at her, then voiced his reservations about what seemed an unreasonably time-consuming decision.
Gabrielle, I think it would save time if we used existing patterns for any similar models and spent more time on the brand new pieces, particularly the complicated ones.
I don't like the previous patterns. They were all made badly.
Jindo found this weird, given her previous bragging about her previous modelist being Japanese, and some of the other patterns were created by her friend who had worked at Balmain and Balenciaga. Now, she seemed to be suggesting that she had never been a fan of any of their work, favouring Jindo's instead, even though he hadn't yet created any new patterns. Scratching his head, he pondered over this conundrum until she flashed a smile at him.
I like your patterns better, Jindo.
Unswayed by her flattery, Jindo still sought to make sense of the situation. He picked up a design sheet to use as an example.
So, you mean for this sweater, for example? You want me to make it from scratch?
Yes.
Gabrielle, I think this sweater is a classic oversized volume, so we can just use any previous construction for the base, then tape the bodice to draw this interesting asymmetric line and deconstruct it to trace each panel.
Jindo quickly sketched out the process he believed to be the most efficient, but the director seemed less than keen to compromise.
No, I want you to do moulage.
You mean draping?
Why? Is that a problem?
Her sudden switch to French was a red flag signaling her mounting impatience, but Jindo was still trying to figure out the logistics. He knew that draping would yield an exquisite form, but given the ticking clock and the projected workload, resorting to such a meticulous method for a less important piece seemed misguided. In the world of fashion, draping is typically used for garments that place a strong emphasis on lines or specific shapes that need constant refinement akin to sculpting. To put it candidly, Gabrielle's insistence was like an Italian restaurant owner insisting the chef prepare a pomodoro pasta using freshly hand-crushed tomatoes, all the while dealing with an array of more complex dishes. After several attempts to express his concerns, Jindo found himself at an impasse with Gabrielle.
Gabrielle, I don't mind draping, but we're producing many pieces in a short amount of time. I'm not sure if it's really necessary to drape such simple items.
With an air of haughty confidence, Gabrielle dropped the famed label's name once again.
Your houses like Chanel. We all do this way. I know how they do, and I am doing exactly the same. You don't know anything about that, no?
Her stern words hung in the air, effectively muting Jindo as she underscored his lack of experience in high-end fashion. Despite nursing a head full of doubts, he decided not to poke the bear further. Instead, he tried to broach a different subject.
Okay, Gabrielle, I get it. By the way, I wonder if only I and Boubacar will make all those 60 pieces.
Gabrielle's pause hinted that she hadn't given this aspect much thought, and then she responded,
I will hire more people.
Ah, more people?
Yes, even me and my aunt will join the atelier.
Your aunt?
Yes, she loves me. She is very kind and always helps me when I need an extra hand. Even since I was at school, she always helped me when I had a lot of homework to do. She actually came to help in the previous collection.
Gabrielle seemed rather pleased about her aunt's involvement, but Jindo was left scratching his head at her vague explanation. The terms school homework were particularly jarring. On a brighter note, he wondered if Gabrielle's aunt was a retired couturier, perhaps one who had once graced the halls of renowned fashion houses. Jindo eyed Gabrielle cautiously, trying to gauge if she had more to disclose about her family member, but she seemed genuinely nonchalant, blinking innocently. He realized there was no room to prod further on the subject, so he let it slide. Meanwhile, Jindo pondered the identities of the others joining the endeavour alongside Gabrielle and her kin. Optimistically, he surmised they might hail from her professional network within the luxury fashion houses. Yet he refrained from seeking clarification, dreading the possibility of receiving yet another embarrassing response.